No, they're not. Okay, jolly good. Yes, they are. Oh, no. We turned into a pantomime already. Jolly good. Could you please ensure that your mobile phones are switched to silent, and councillors please remind you to speak directly into the microphone and make sure that your cards are pushed firmly into the console. Members of the public, I'd like to say that as a committee we understand the matters under consideration tonight can be emotive, but please be respectful of those around you in the public gallery and indeed on the committee, and refrain from any booing, cheering or any other forms of disturbance. This is a meeting held in public, not a public meeting. And also, members, this evening we're going to introduce the 4-minute rule for the debate, but I will invite you to ask short questions before we start the actual debate. Just introduce the officers sitting around the table in front of me. Elizabeth Sims, Head of Planning, Richard Fox, Interim Development Manager, Louise Yandel, Area Team Leader, Flo Taylor, Principal Planning Officer, Kaylee Taylor, no relation, Planning Officer, and Barry Devling, our Planning Lawyer. So the first item of business this evening is the minutes of the last meeting, which have been on the table in front of you for the last 30 minutes. Are you happy for me to sign them as a true record? Thank you very much. Emma, any apologies for absence and declarations of substitutes?
Okay, we have apologies from councillors Adams, Brian Adams, Dennis Lee and Liz Townsend. Thank you.
Any declarations of interest?
None prior to the meeting.
Any questions from the public?
None received.
Any questions from members?
None received.
Jolly good. Louise and Richard, would you like to run through the performance against government targets for us, please?
Yes, sorry, good evening, members of the public and councillors. Sorry, for those who haven't met me, I'm Richard Fox, Development Manager. Just introducing, this is going to be a standard item on, I think, both the JPC and the area committees, and Louise will correct me if I'm wrong on that. The figures speak for themselves. The performance, both on speed, particularly on speed, is excellent. Sort of coming in as a fresh face, it's very good. And on quality as well, what I'm hoping is, with certainly part 1 of the local plan in place and part 2 well on the road, that will improve and enhance as well. So essentially all I'm saying, Chairman, as a summary, is we're in a good place. I think we're in a good place anyway. So I don't know, Louise, do you want to add anything to that? Or?
No, that covers it. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, moving on to the main items, the planning applications for consideration this evening. We're going to take Woolmead first, which is different to the agenda which was sent out. But that's the way that it's been organised. So the first application is reference WA 2018-0458, the Woolmead, East Street, Farnham, and it is for the erection of a building to provide 138 dwellings, 4,009. And I would invite Flo to introduce the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Just before I start the presentation, I'll draw your attention to the update sheet. The first thing that needs to be noted is that the amended National Planning Policy Framework was published yesterday. It has some changes, but it does not alter the conclusions of the agenda reports tonight. I've drawn attention to where in the report references were made to the NPPF and relevant reasons within conditions have been amended to reflect the new NPPF. Other things of note is just an update to the total number in the market housing table, clarification on the SAN contribution figures, and just an additional submission from the applicant justifying their approach within the financial appraisal submitted in respect of viability. There's been some amendment to conditions just to clarify, simplify things. And the refusal reasons have just been amended in respect of the new MPPF, and therefore the recommendations have also been revised to take into account the changes to the conditions and the changes to the refusal reasons for recommendation B. Turning to the slide before you, you see the location line. The site's located within the red line to the east of Farnham Town Centre. It comprises an island plot of land sitting between East Street, Bear Lane, Woolmead Road, and to the north of the Brightwell site. The plot currently accommodates a 3-storey building of 1960s architecture, which contains a row of retail units at ground floor level, offices, and 4 residential dwellings, which are considered to be the lawful use of the site. The immediate area surrounding the site is of mixed use and character, and the conservation area is located to the west of the site. The aerial photograph just gives additional information about the site and the surrounding built form. Looking at the existing photos of the site, on the left-hand side you can see the images of the existing East Street elevation, with the southwestern end at the top and the northeastern end at the bottom. On the right-hand side is an image of the rear Woolmead Road elevation. Looking at the block plan, this shows how the development would occupy the site. You'll note that whilst there is a continuous frontage to East Street along the bottom, the development would have 5 wings which link across to Woolmead Road and allow for the creation of internal amenity courtyards between them. Vehicular access to the site would be from Woolmead Road into a basement car park. The scheme has been designed to function whether the traffic management proposals from Brightwells go ahead or not, and the County Highway Authority is satisfied that the proposals would not result in harm to highway safety, subject to conditions and infrastructure contributions, which include, amongst others, a financial contribution towards Farnham Town Centre transport sustainability and accessibility improvements, and improvements for pedestrians at the Bear Lane junction. The main residential and commercial accesses would be from East Street, with servicing and secondary residential accesses from Woolmead Road. Around the site, hard and soft landscaping and public realm improvements would be secured by condition. Members may recall that outline permission was granted for the redevelopment of this site back in 2016, and the principle of the redevelopment of this site has therefore been established. This application, however, is a new full application by a different applicant. The existing East Street elevation is shown at the top of the slide, and this is superimposed as the red dashed line on the proposed East Street elevation at the bottom. The approved outline scheme is superimposed with the blue dashed line, which shows a similar height of development proposed as that previously approved by members. The test for members will be whether, having regard to the changes, the current proposal is materially more harmful than the approved scheme and is acceptable in its own right. Looking at the proposed elevations, this image shows the proposed elevations with East Street at the top, Woolmead Road in the middle, and the 2 end elevations at the bottom. Officers were involved in extensive pre-application discussions about these proposals and considered it key that all 4 elevations were addressed as frontages so as to prevent there being a back elevation to the island site. The scheme would have a variety of scale and building heights up to 4-storey in places. A more traditional approach has been applied to the East Street elevation at the top, and more contemporary approach to the Woolmead Road elevation, which is developed in response to the differing building form and massing in the surrounding areas. The Bear Lane elevation has a traditional appearance and lower height, which relates well to the adjacent conservation area, whereas the Dogflood Way elevation would have a more contemporary appearance. The scheme has evolved to have 4 separate character areas, which help break the scheme down. Traditional character, referring to the Georgian period, is applied to Bear Lane and the western end of East Street, which is mainly red brick with white sash windows. To the central part of East Street, the design refers to the Edwardian and arts and crafts styles with mainly red, but some buff brick, some mansard roofs and dormers, and a mix of sash and casement windows. The eastern end of East Street would have a more contemporary character, with a mix of buff and red bricks and some vertical projecting bays in white render, and a mix of white and grey windows. The Wallmead Road elevation seen in the centre would have a more contemporary vernacular character, with some full-height glazing with grey frames, a mix of brick and render, some projecting bay windows, and some roof terraces to link apartments. This elevation would have an interesting rhythm, resulting from the height of the wings across the development and the lower development to the edges of the courtyard, which also reflects the more domestic-scale dwellings fronting the elevation across Wallmead Road. The internal amenity courtyards would make use of white render to reflect light. Officers are satisfied that proposals would not result in material harm to neighbouring residential amenity through loss of light, overlooking, or being overbearing. Turning to the floor plans, the basement would have a vehicular access from Wallmead Road and provide parking spaces to meet the council's residential parking standards. There would be no on-site commercial parking. However, this was the situation with the approved outline scheme, and officers consider acceptable given the highly sustainable location and proximity of public car parks. 28 electrical vehicle charging points are proposed, with a further 28 to be enabled for future conversion. Full details of these would be secured by condition and would contribute to assisting with air quality. There would be 5 lift cords spread across the basement to provide access for all to both the ground floor and the residential units above. On the ground floor, shown at the bottom, would be 11 commercial units, which have been designed to be able to be flexible in size depending on the type of commercial business occupying the unit. The proposal would comprise of flexible mixed use for the commercial units, including shops, financial services, cafes and restaurants, drinking establishments and offices. These uses are all considered to be appropriate town centre uses, and officers also note that the overall reduction in commercial and retail floor space has been established through the grant of permission for the outline scheme. At mezzanine level, making use of the land height difference between East Street and Wallmead Road, would be both residential and commercial cycle stores, and there would also be commercial and residential bin stores spread along the development and access from Wallmead Road. This slide shows the layout of the 138 residential units which would be located across the first, second and third floors. As can be seen, the quantity of residential units decreases as the floor levels increase, reflecting the decrease in quantum of built form as the height of the development increases. There would be 76 studio and one-bed apartments, 57 two-bed apartments and 5 three-bed apartments. There would be no affordable housing provided. However, the Council has instructed viability consultants to assess the submitted viability information and is satisfied that, whilst in conflict with Policy AHN1, it would not be reasonable to require the provision of any affordable housing or any contribution towards it. At first floor level, there would be 3 amenity courtyards, and additionally, some of the other units would benefit from balconies or private roof terraces. Whilst amenity space would be limited, it is considered acceptable for this town centre location, given the smaller nature of the units less suitable for families and the proximity of nearby public spaces. Turning to determining issues, I've already covered the position in respect of the approved outline scheme and that the loss of commercial and retail land was considered acceptable at the time. I've explained that it would not be viable for affordable housing to be provided and that the highways impacts would be acceptable, subject to requested infrastructure contributions and conditions. There would not be harm to heritage assets, and flooding, air quality and archaeology impacts would be prevented through the use of conditions. In terms of the SPA, following the Sweetman judgment, an appropriate assessment has been carried out and approved by Natural England, and subject to the contribution to Farnham Park Sang to be secured in the Section 106 agreement, the impact of the development upon the Thames Basin Heaths SPA would be adequately mitigated. Infrastructure contributions agreed include the highways and SANG contributions already mentioned, early primary and secondary education contributions, contributions to playing pitch improvement at Farnham Park, Gostrey Meadow play area, the Heathland Hub at Frensham Great Pond, Farnham Leisure Centre swimming pool and recycling containers. Turning to the matters of judgment, officers consider that the proposal would be of an acceptable mix and density and visually acceptable and would not result in material harm to neighbouring residential amenity. Moving to the recommendation, this would be the revised recommendations A and B as set out on pages 10 to 11 of the update sheet. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Flo. This application is subject to public speaking, and I would invite the supporter, Max Galton, to come to the fore, please. Good evening, Mr. Galton. I understand the procedure has been explained to you, and you have 4 minutes from the time when you start speaking. Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Max Galton. I'm Development Manager for Berkeley Homes, and thank you firstly for the opportunity to speak in favour of the proposals tonight. Berkeley's worked closely with Waverley officers over the last 9 months and undertaken public consultation with local stakeholders to create a scheme that Berkeley, Waverley, residents of Farnham can be proud of. Berkeley is renowned as a quality developer, has been in the business of placemaking for over 40 years, building homes and environments that stand the test of time. Berkeley is proud to be developing in such a prestigious town as Farnham, with a landmark scheme in a prominent and strategic location at the eastern end of the town centre. Berkeley is known for its attention to detail, and the proposals in front of you tonight have gone through a painstaking design process culminating in a scheme of exceptional quality designed to enhance the local neighbourhood for years to come. The scheme itself, to recap, the scheme proposes demolition of the existing Wallmead Centre and redevelopment to provide 11 commercial units on the ground floor with 138 residential dwellings above, associated basement car parking and landscaping, and the scheme conforms with the relevant planning policies. The scheme replaces a 1960s concrete structure which is at odds with the rest of the town and consists of buildings with a horizontal emphasis, exposed parking and servicing areas to Wallmead Road, which provides an unattractive environment. The new proposals are complementary to the adjacent conservation area at the western end of East Street and provides buildings with vertical emphasis and a blend of architectural styles. It's more traditional at the western end of East Street and blends through to more contemporary at the eastern end of East Street and onto the Wallmead Road, and also complements the forthcoming adjacent development proposals. The scheme itself is designed to work with both existing and future highways proposals in the area, including the pedestrianisation of East Street and making Wallmead Road two-way. The scheme's been through a design review with Design South East, and recommendations have been incorporated where reasonably practicable. Turning to community benefits, there's an agreed heads of terms being reached with Waverley, which is a package of infrastructure contributions totalling approximately £950,000 towards education, leisure, the Thames Basin, Heath SPA and highways. The scheme also provides car club funding. Contributions will be secured through a Section 106 agreement, and a draft of that has been submitted to the Council for consideration. Turning to consultee comments, there's been no objections received from statutory consultees subject to completion of a 106 agreement and the relevant planning conditions, and those include Surrey as the Highway Authority and the local lead flood authority, Natural England in relation to the SPA, and Waverley's internal consultees, including environmental health on air quality. There's only been 13 neighbour objections received, which is a low number for a town centre redevelopment scheme, and those predominantly focused on issues such as design, which is a highly subjective matter, traffic, the impact of which was considered acceptable by Surrey as the Highways Authority, air quality, the impact again was considered acceptable by Waverley Environmental Health, and car parking, where the provision marginally exceeds Waverley's parking standards. I would therefore urge members to support the application wherever they feel able. In conclusion, a thorough design process has been undertaken with Waverley officers, external stakeholders, and to create a scheme that Berkeley, Waverley and the residents of Farnham can be proud of. It's a scheme of exceptional quality, one designed to enhance the local neighbourhood for years to come. The scheme delivers significant community benefits with a package of infrastructure contributions totalling around £950,000. No objections received from statutory consultees and low numbers of local neighbour objections. And in closing, Berkeley is keen to deliver the scheme should planning consent be granted, with demolition due to commence in late summer 2018. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Galton. Well timed. I'd now invite Councillor Andy MacLeod, the Ward Councillor, to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. It's widely accepted in Farnham that this redevelopment is necessary. However, speaking as the local ward member, I have a number of concerns, and more importantly, so do quite a few of my residents and other Farnham residents. These relate to the overall design, appearance and bulk of the building, the connections to the rest of the town, the lack of affordable housing, the disruption during the build period. On design, not being an expert in this area, I would simply refer you to the many concerns expressed by the experienced local architects and the Farnham Society. Barclay Homes also referred their design to the Independent Design South East panel. This report referred to some strong concepts in this proposal, but also stated that some further development of the design will be necessary, however, if it is to be successfully integrated into the historic townscape of the surrounding area, including a more ambitious approach to the design of roads, streets and public spaces around the site. Very little of that seems to have happened in the revised design, and Barclays did not take the panel up on their offer to review the revised design, which is unfortunate to say the least. The connection to the town centre is very poor through the Royal Deer Junction in the Borough, but hopefully that can be tackled through the town centre project sponsored by Jeremy Hunt. Barclays claim, as so many of the other highly profitable developers do these days, that their development would not be viable if they had to provide or fund affordable housing, and they have produced a report to support this claim. I have to say I am not convinced. They are working on a profit margin of 12.3 million on total project revenues of 57 million, 21.5%, which seems a little bit excessive compared to what I understand to be the general industry guidelines of around 15 to 20%. For example, in comparison, we can think about the 3 to 4% that Surrey hope to gain from Brightwells. It will be a miracle if that actually happens. The finance cost of 4.8 million and funds required of around 36.1 million also seems unrealistically high at today's interest rates. The disruption from this project will be significant, with around 80 heavy lorries per day during the demolition phase of around 3 to 4 months, and around 2,000 in total during the basement excavation phase of around 8 months. What the public will really not understand or appreciate when it all starts to happen is why all of this is going on at completely disrupting the town at exactly the same time as the Brightwells development, not to mention the many other developments arising from the Waverley local plan and the local plans of our 3 surrounding boroughs in Hampshire and Guildford. In summary, we seem to be sleepwalking into a potentially chaotic period in Farnham, which could well seriously damage the town's future prosperity. The final thing I would say is please don't take the relative lack of public process these days as acquiescence to all that is going on. It's not that, it's just that many feel they are just not being listened to by Waverley, and they find other ways of expressing their feelings through, for example, social media or at local elections. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor MacLeod. Members? Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. I share almost all of Councillor MacLeod's sentiments. I would just like to ask officers specifically, though, if they could elaborate upon what criteria the financial viability is assessed to exempt developers from that 30%, because that affordable housing is particularly objectionable to me. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Chairman. Sorry, thank you. So a viability statement was submitted with the application, and that has been independently reviewed by our viability consultants, and they are satisfied that it is not viable to provide affordable housing on the site. In addition to this, members will remember that the outline scheme, which had a lower number of dwellings, but it was also concluded in that scheme that no affordable housing, it was not viable to provide any affordable housing. So the fallback position is that no affordable housing can be provided on this site. Thank you.
You may, yes, of course.
Could the officers just comment upon what margin the developers are going to be receiving from this project?
Okay.
Yeah, unfortunately that is confidential, so we cannot say that in public at committee.
Councillor Ward.
Chairman, may I ask a question first and speak later? Just looking on page 91, heads of terms, there's lots of money sloshing around in there that's going to be spent on a number of projects. Could the officers tell me how these projects are selected and who selects them? I'm interested in odd things, much as I love Frensham Great Pond, about town centre money heading out to Frensham. And on page 91, the third one, I'm not quite sure what traffic reduction measures, intelligent bus priority and cycling pedestrian safety means. Will this be discussed with the Town Council? Thank you.
Thank you. Officers, you probably would have liked a bit more advance warning of that question, but Louise, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, in relation to the contributions themselves, they are selected by the infrastructure providers. So, for example, the contribution towards the Frensham Great Ponds has come from our Parks and Leisure team, and sort of the education contributions come from Surrey County Council Highways. In relation to the highways, it is a scheme of highways improvements that will be secured through the Highways 278 works, and that would be agreed with Surrey County Council at the relevant point before the development begins. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Ward, do you wish to come back? Yes?
I'm happy with that. I'd like to speak later.
Right. Thank you. It does indeed, yes.
New condition. Well, first of all, let me say I'm delighted to see electric charging points. I confess I have a hybrid car, but since I probably won't be living there, they won't affect me. However, if I remember the officer's introduction, it was 28 and then possibly another 28, which my fast arithmetic gives me 56 out of 158. 2 points on that. It really would be rather nicer in this forward-thinking age when diesel and electric cars will soon not be for sale if we could put in the infrastructure, if not the final charging points, so that everyone would be able to either be supplied with or supply themselves with an electric point. So I would very much like to see more. And when I look at the actual condition in the papers, there are actually no numbers in there. We've just heard them verbally this evening. I really would like numbers pinned down a little more firmly than that. And looking at condition 5, transport management plans, clearly we have failed to give the officers sufficient guidance in the past on this matter. May I be absolutely assured that no interesting haul roads will be built through interesting places? Thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth, would you like to address those? Thank you.
Chairman, I think the answer to the latter point is that, as members are aware, the discharge of conditions generally is a matter undertaken under delegated powers, but we are also mindful in instances where there are sensitivities around detail that we can and do from time to time share details with the ward member. So that we will be mindful of that general expectation. There isn't a haul road proposed in this instance. I don't think that will be coming forward, but I understand the reference you're making. So I think, Chairman, probably the best advice to give back to the committee, we understand the sensitivities. As the discharge of conditions, if permissions granted, start to come in, we'll be mindful of the appropriate point to share the details as appropriate with the ward member. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. Louise, you wish to speak? Yes.
Yeah, just with regards to the electric vehicle charging points, the 28 spaces would be provided. That is in accordance with the Surrey County Council guidance, which requires 20% of spaces to be provided with the charging points and 20% of spaces to be enabled. Officers are satisfied with the condition, but if members feel it is necessary, then we can add those numbers specifically into that condition so that is more comprehensive.
Thank you. Councillor Ward, did you wish to come back?
Just one thing. I mean, Waverley sometimes lags and sometimes leads, and in electric charging points, Waverley, in building its own houses, is very definitely leading because we're putting them in all of the affordable housing that we build. And I would really like to see a more onerous condition put on the developer, even as high as the one which we ourselves observe. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I think there's a general view that anything is better than what's there at the moment, but we must do our very best that we can for Farnham, and I thank Councillor MacLeod, who I agree with wholeheartedly, and Farnham Society also for their comments on design, which has been very handy. But I'll stick to technical issues, or policy issues. There's no affordable housing provision, and the viability report, I believe, is quite dubious in that there's a £2 million difference between the calculations of the residual land value of the developer and their consultants, I believe. And somehow, even though we've increased the number of flats dramatically, the residual land value of this development is £600,000 or £700,000 less, supposedly. Now, I think that we need to look at that. I think that is an unacceptable departure. I mean, this is a departure application, of course. Both the officer report and the developer fully accept that, but I think that is an unacceptable departure, and we should press for some affordable housing. Another consideration, of course, the amenity of residents, because that must be borderline, as the flats do not meet the minimum size standards. And we can't refuse on minimum size standards, but we have a precedent, certainly within Farnham, of refusing similar sized rooms or flats on grounds of lack of amenity. Very concerned, Mr. Chairman, that there's no parking provision for commercial uses. Very inconvenient for businesses and won't attract businesses particularly. There is a big problem, of course, which is quite technical, and I've addressed it in emails today, and we've addressed it previously in emails, which is the claim that the Sweetman ruling in respect of habitats has been complied with and an appropriate assessment has been produced, but appropriate assessment must contain an assessment of the mitigation. That's what the ruling says. So I will be in a minute proposing that we defer because we do not have the necessary information, and it would be better to defer than refuse. And certainly the way the law stands, and I think most members are aware by now, is we can't get around the Sweetman ruling by simply putting a different title on the top of a piece of paper, calling it an appropriate assessment when it doesn't contain the minimum information necessary, Chairman. I did mention to officers earlier, and I know it was late, but I have a problem with that neither the site access to the multi-storey car park, nor the proposed service bays and bus stop proposals on East Street work in the existing network scenario. All members are aware, I think, that this has to work in both the with crest, two-way round the back of the Woolmead, and the existing network, where it's one way around the back of Woolmead, and it needs to work in both scenarios. And I did ask Louise if she could make available the slide of the swept track diagram, which is Appendix G within the transport assessment, because I would just like to show and let members see why I'm concerned that it appears they have not done the track changes. Is that possible to bring it up, please?
Apologies, we're just trying to get that for you. It seems that it wasn't saved into the slide when we press save. Apologies, this might just take a couple of minutes, sorry.
To motion to defer, can I, with the basket, isn't it? would you like to come back and let somebody else have a go on a different subject whilst because I would like to come back if I may, as I say, when we've had a look at that.
Okay, Councillor Hyman, that's very kind of you. Councillor Follows, you wish to come back, yes?
Can I just, another quick question regarding the affordable housing and the financial viability. Not that I'd wish to displace quite so many members of the public, but if we were to go to exempt matters on the issue, would you be able to discuss it in more detail with the information you have?
We would be able to discuss it further in exempt. However, we have had independent consultants look at it, and that is what the council employs them to do, to scrutinise that information. And so we are satisfied that the information has been adequately scrutinised and that they cannot provide affordable housing on this site. And again, obviously there is a fallback position on this site. Outline permission has been granted, and that did not secure affordable housing. So it would be unreasonable to revisit the principle of that. Thank you.
So I understand it's been established, but it is a new developer with a new application, although it is for the same site, I agree. But in practice, those consultants employed scrutinise based on a set of criteria, and I'd like to understand what those criteria are to establish whether they were reasonable to exempt a developer from providing affordable housing, in that it is a policy of the local plan.
So broadly, the viability would be based on the land value of the site, which is raised because of the fallback position with regards to there was a prior approval on the site which was approved. So that raised the land value, and that is an accepted land value from our consultants. And then based on the cost of delivering the scheme and the developer's profit, which again is based on guidance and a set amount, which is an acceptable profit margin, and all those numbers together conclude that it is unviable to provide affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mulliner.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'd just like to make the comment that I can easily sympathise with those who are astonished that a significant increase in the number of residential units, normally the most lucrative form of property improvement, should be accompanied by no change in the viability as far as affordable housing is concerned. So it may not be possible to do much with this application, but I would like to take the opportunity to suggest that in future, when officers are aware that the viability report will lead to no affordable housing, they should warn members early on. It shouldn't just really come out either in the report or by scrutinising the documents online. I think it would be very helpful to us if we could be warned that this is happening, and members could then ask for a pre-meeting discussion with officers when the matter can be gone into. I feel it's the sort of thing which can be a little emotive, and members of the public will expect their councillors to have done their best to check that what is being proposed is reasonable. So to avoid this situation happening in future, I would be grateful if this could be considered by the officers, and indeed if my colleagues have comments on this idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the point is well made. Clearly, in our report, we're trying to give you the benefit of our advice, having had that independent advice submitted to us. Generally speaking, the information and viability assessments are containing detail that's commercially sensitive. It's not unusual that it's been held in exempt, but do understand the sensitivity about that. We'll take the point. It may be in future instances we contain the information in an exempt annex, which is another way of doing it. But so apologies if you would prefer to have had it first hand, but I can say that having taken the independent advice on your behalf to ensure that the applicant's case is independently scrutinised, you can be confident that the recommendation that we're giving you is predicated on that advice and is suitable to take into account in your decision. So thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. Richard, you wish to add to that?
Yeah, just to follow on and echo everything Elizabeth's just said, Councillor, I think it might be helpful, sort of, it's one of those to take offline through you, Chairman, in terms of when we're all together and we're gathered together, just to sort of emphasise and re-emphasise the process that we go through, yeah, in practical terms, to reach these decisions and recommendations. Maybe pre-committee or a regular training session. I don't know. I said I'm very new here, but yeah, you understand what I'm saying, I'm sure. Yeah.
We'll look at it. Have we found the plan that Councillor Hyman was anxious to see? I was still looking for it. Okay, so Councillor Denis.
Thank you, Chair. In fact, I think Elizabeth has probably preempted what I was going to suggest, that in future, I think if it's on confidential exempt, that'd be really, really useful. And I suppose my question may be slightly rhetorical because I'm hoping I get a correct answer, but it obviously in 2015 on 2387, which was the outline, the permission was granted with no requirement for affordable, that the financial appraisal is a completely new financial appraisal for the numbers and everything else. I'm 99.9% it would be, but I would just like that to be clarified.
Louise?
Yes, absolutely. This is a new appraisal because it is based on the costs of this specific development. So, absolutely.
Right, Councillor Hyman, I think we have your swept path analysis on the screen.
Delightful. That's wonderful. Thank you very much. I somehow doubted it was going to be able to appear, but lovely. Now, you can see, I think, from there that this shows the with crest development, a two-way around the back of the Woolmeads scenario. You can see those the squiggly lines are the tracks of the vehicles turning right from the left-hand lane and turning left from the right-hand lane, if you know what I mean. Turning right from the, yeah. But what it doesn't show there is vehicles in the current scenario without Crest Nicholson's road changes. So it's one way moving from left to right along Woolmead Road from west to east. And the vehicles in the right-hand lane there have got to turn right around a vehicle that would be in the left-hand lane of the car park exit. So if you know what I mean, you've got to turn with absolutely no radius of curvature, and you need four-wheel steering on your car to do that, probably. It creates problems there that it would not satisfy. I don't think it works, basically. I'm surprised that this has come back because it was something which was not too clever about the previous application, but this hasn't changed. So just so the members can see, what we need is a swept track diagram. We need them to consider that scenario because they haven't done so, and the developer says it has. So unless members can assure me that there is one somewhere else that we haven't seen, and I did have a look with the officer earlier on and we couldn't find one, then I think we ought to see that. So what I'd like...
That's point taken. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Louise, did you wish to respond?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much for bringing your question to me earlier today, and apologies again for not having the slide up. In relation to the existing road layout, so should the Brightwells development not proceed, then vehicles would turn into the site from the right-hand lane round here into the into the site itself down here, and then when exiting the site they will come out through here and turn right into the one-way system. So effectively you can ignore the swept path analysis at the top of your screen because there would be signage secured as part of the general package of highway improvements that would be secured as part of the 278 agreement to ensure that vehicles would only turn from the left-hand lane directly into the site and then directly from the right-hand lane, directly into the site and then again out onto Woolmead Road on the right-hand lane. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Band.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I too am disappointed not to see any affordable housing on this site, but having said that, I accept the officer's advice that there is no viability to do so. However, I am concerned that in accepting this, we will be slipping behind our targets to build affordable housing. I mean, the various SMAR reports, if you recall, made it quite clear that unless we continue to achieve at least 30% of the developments contributing affordable housing, we wouldn't meet our affordable housing demands. So it is disappointing that a development of this size does not make any contribution. And so I fully endorse Councillor Molyneux's suggestion that if we get to this situation again, we do need a pre-briefing which not only justifies why that particular application has no affordable housing, but in addition demonstrates how we intend, through other likely sites, to recover the situation and achieve our ambitions for affordable housing. Because without affordable housing, our communities will not survive. You know, we desperately need affordable housing, particularly in our urban centres, because to maintain the viability and the cross-sections of the population which we need. So, you know, whilst I accept it in this application, I really am concerned that on an application of this size, we are not making any contribution, and we really need to make sure we can achieve our affordable housing targets. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor, sorry, Richard, did you wish to respond?
Sorry, Chairman. Just for you, interesting enough, anecdotally, we had a meeting with housing colleagues this afternoon, and actually, sorry, on your specific point, I totally accept everything that you say and wholeheartedly support it. But our statistics, and I think Louise, you were in the same meeting as me, our completions on the affordable housing front are very, very good and ahead of target at the moment. But so I'm not, you know, taking away for 1 second the importance of this as an issue. But I think our track record so far stands up to scrutiny. If I can just make that interjection. Sorry, Chairman.
And if I can just add, in relation to this specific scheme, officers will always carefully scrutinise every single application, and our policy is for 30% affordable housing, which we will seek on all developments where possible. But national policy makes it clear that where development is unviable, we are unable to refuse an application on that basis. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Louise. Councillor Byam.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I share all of the concerns about no affordable housing. I find it absolutely appalling, actually, that we should be in this situation with the development of this size. Of course, I haven't worked out exactly how many of the proposed flats, etc., are below acceptable normal standards. Perhaps we wouldn't accept them as affordable housing because they wouldn't be big enough. Is that a possibility? I also note that we're spending in terms of money that we are asking them to put money forward for, we're spending about 25% less on education than we are on looking after our birds, or rather where the dogs will go for a walk, not the birds themselves. Should that money actually be going towards affordable housing?
Chairman, if I could just answer that. I suppose the reality of it is that the compliance with the habitats regulations is an absolute requirement on the application for it to be lawful and to comply with the Habitats Directive and the regulations. Otherwise, you would be needing to refuse permission. And so, whilst you may, in your minds, find that the developer's spend could be prioritised in a different way, particularly in policy terms, there is no option there for the development to be built out, having regard to its direct effect on the SPA. That money has to be spent on mitigating that effect through provision towards SANG. So I appreciate the comment you're making, but it's not an option really for the planning committee really in that sense. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I just ask a very brief question, first of all, from page 87? It isn't, is this the ugliest building you've ever seen? At the top, on that first one, there's a bit of public art, and it's been raised. I have to be honest to say I've driven past it and missed it a few times, but it has been raised by the Farnham Public Art Trust, and I couldn't see any reference to it. Have I missed that?
Officers.
Sorry, we're laughing amongst ourselves, not at yourself, but because we were out on site looking at this proposal yesterday, and we were talking amongst ourselves about how best to actually see. There's a couple of two pieces of public art at least on the existing building, and how best they could be preserved, retained, and I think is the jury out on that to a certain extent, but I don't know if we contacted the applicants. I think we did, didn't we?
I think probably what we could do is attach a condition to say that full details of how the public art would be disposed of, being that to a historical society or however that may be. If we asked for full details about how the public art would be removed and who it would be given to, we could do that as part of a condition.
That would be good, because there is a precedent here at the old police station site where we had to rebuild something that fell over in the wind, but at least, we did do what we could. Right, thank you very much. I will pass that on to the Farnham Public Art Trust. While you're looking at those pictures, you can see why there's a queue for the first bulldozer. We'd all pay good money to get in it and absolutely slam it straight into this building. It's I think it's the most hated building in Farnham. When we went on the site visit, I can remember a colleague to my right sort of not exactly swooning at the sight of it, but certainly not feeling any better having looked at it. It was an island site. Whoever gave it permission, you should be hanging your head in shame. I'm sure it's nobody in this room. To have an island site with such a front and a back is just appalling. And the residents of Lower South View will have a decent view of something. Okay, it's going to be built form, but compared to what they look onto now, when you go upstairs in the houses in Lower South View, which are lovely small houses, lovely south-facing gardens, and then you look onto the rubbish that's there at the moment. Okay, so that's not a good enough reason just to accept this. But I have to say, we put this, as you know, I chair the neighbourhood plan team in Farnham, and this site came forward very early on, and in fact we worked very closely with the previous owners on this site, not so much with Barclays, to make sure that it would be delivered and would include a great number of houses, because it is such a sustainable site. You can walk to the station from here, the shops, it is adjacent to the conservation area. It was always going to be a difficult site in the sense that it is an island site, but not a difficult site in the sense that, quite frankly, my grandson could have designed something better than the Woolmead. So to see something like this with a lot of thought that has gone into it, it's not necessarily what I would have ended up with, but give us all a piece of paper and a pencil and we'd all come up with, 60 different pictures. So we have to accept there's some compromise in all these big developments in the town centre. I'm not going to revisit electric charging points or affordable homes. I think we've done that. If you just look at it as it is and see it as broken up as much as you can do with a large building, I think it's going to work. Some people have said they prefer the reverse side, the slightly more modern side. They were probably slightly younger than me. I prefer the other side, but I actually think it will work in the position that it's going to sit. Of course, we've got reservations. When we put it in the neighbourhood plan, we had no idea it would clash with the East Street development. But that's just where we are. We can't penalise Berkeley Homes for coming in now for an application when it's ready, just because, unfortunately, it's going to clash with a lot of other building. We'll just have to cope. Somebody said we could just shut Farnham off for 4 years and all go away and come back later. But, it's going to be difficult. Everyone in Farnham knows it is, but I think at the end of all the development, we are going to have something that is so much better than what is there. It's going to have a certain amount of commercial use, and we want to keep the town vibrant. It's going to have housing, and quite small-scale housing. I don't think the schools will actually be bothered very much by the occupants of these flats, but I can see lots of people who will enjoy living in them, people who will enjoy going into the town in the evening, will enjoy walking to the station, walking to the buses because of where it is. So can I have some sort of positive support on this one? Because I think really and truly it is not bad, given the site, given where it is, given the size of it. I think really the developers have done a reasonable job. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we move to the recommendation, Councillor MacLeod, would you like to come back?
Yeah, briefly, Mr. Chairman. I don't really want to say any more on the actual issues, but I was a little bit concerned, actually, that after I made some comments about the affordable housing and quoted some numbers, that Louise and the officers made it clear that it was perhaps confidential information. And I apologise and I'll be more careful in the future. All I can say is that this information is actually in the public domain, in fact. Members of the public have discussed it with me. They've got copies of the document, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it still isn't confidential. So if I've overstepped the bounds there, I do apologise, Chairman. I will be more careful in the future.
Sorry, Chairman, bearing in mind that comment, Councillor MacLeod, if we could just clarify a point on that, just for the record, I think it would be really important. I'm going to hand over to Flo on that. Thank you.
Just to clarify, the assessor's report has been made public. The full appendices with all the detailed information have remained confidential. So if you've seen the report on the website, that is open to members of the public.
If I can just say that does answer the questions that Councillor Follows is interested in. If he looks at that report on the website, his questions will be answered. Even though I haven't apparently overstepped the bounds.
Thank you. Councillor Hyman, have you a new point to put to us?
Well, I don't know whether you consider it as a new point. It's where I said I was heading, actually, Chairman, if you don't mind. I appreciate the comments that others have made, including Councillor Band and Councillor Mulliner. I would say it's not too late for us to rescue this if the viability study, viability appraisal, if it were to take a look at that, I think that there should be a possibility, from what the figures I've seen, they do look like they are going to have trouble withstanding scrutiny, that we should have some affordable housing in this scheme. And in view of the fact, and it is a fact that we don't have an assessment of habitats mitigation, we should be deferring in respect of that. There are other issues, but there's those two big issues there, which is the viability, which we do have time to take a look at, because it'll certainly take a month or two to put together a proper appropriate assessment with the habitats mitigation assessed within it to quantify how much housing we can have. So I would like to put it to members. I mean, I don't want to waste everybody's time, and we don't want a particularly long evening, but what I would like to do is get some idea, rather than the choice that we have of grant consent or refuse consent, whether we defer and see whether we can get affordable housing and do things properly with an assessment of habitats mitigation.
Okay, would you like to
so
put
may
that
I
as a
propose
proposal
deferral on that?
Yes. Do you have a seconder?
I don't know. I haven't asked.
And a seconder.
Thank you.
Okay. Does anybody wish?
Mr. Chairman, we do in effect have an assessment under the Habitats Directive. The Sweetman case concerned a new project in Ireland, a wind farm which had effects on two rivers. It was a completely new project and clearly required habitat regulation appropriate assessment. And one of the paragraphs to that says that conclusion is supported by the fact a full and precise analysis of the measures capable of avoiding or reducing any significant effects on the site concerned must be carried out not at screening stage, but specifically at the stage of appropriate assessment. Well, we have carried out an appropriate assessment. That was tendered to Natural England, and Natural England agreed with the appropriate assessment that there was no adverse effect. Now, the appropriate assessment is based, as you know, on a number of documents, all of which Natural England have been involved with to a considerable degree. And I could go through them, but I'll just quickly skim over them. The Joint Strategic Partnership Board drew up the document called the Delivery Framework, which set out the key principles designed to achieve the provision of SANG, and which is suitable alternative to actual green space provision, and SAM, which is Site Access Management and Monitoring of the Special Protection Area, and what was required from developers in terms of monetary payments. Now, that was set out in a document adopted in 2009 called the Delivery Framework. Now, that delivery framework is fully signed up to by Natural England, and Natural England worked with a statutory body called the Joint Nature Conservation Committee, established under the Natural Resources and Communities Act 2006. One of the functions they're charged with is continuously renewing and updating the evidential bases, and they've done a specific appraisal of the Thames Basin Heath Spa. So we know, therefore, that the evidential base opposite that has been updated, is updated, and English Nature are currently cognizant of it. So therefore, in the context of the delivery framework in 2009, a supplementary paper was written up on the methodology of the calculation of site access management and monitoring called Tariff Guidance, which was signed off by Council, Mr. David Elwin. And this is actually a Natural England document bearing the logo Natural England. So we have that document in the process. And finally, of course, we have the key avoidance strategy itself review, lastly reviewed in 2016, which states at various points that Natural England have approved the document. So the methodology is there, fully approved by Natural England, based on an evidence base. And in the context of that evidence base, we have submitted an appropriate assessment through Natural England, which finds there is no adverse effect. So therefore, Mr. Chairman, Councillor Hyman is wrong. There is a satisfactory and legal appropriate assessment being carried out in this matter.
Okay. Councillor Hyman has proposed a deferral and he has a seconder, so I will allow Councillor Hyman to speak to that proposal.
That's very kind of you, Chairman. Thank you very much. And well, with the greatest respect, the Sweetman ruling effectively says that Waverley's previous approach and Natural England's approach has not been lawful. It requires the assessment of the habitats mitigation, and we don't have that. I would challenge someone to stand up here and swear that we do have an assessment of the habitats mitigation, because we never have. And in fact, we know that our habitats mitigation in Farnham is based upon an imaginary new car park serving an imaginary new access to Farnham Park, creating greater accessibility. It's an imaginary new car park by the Six Bells roundabout, which most people know as the Dell. Of course, it's highway, it's not a car park, and it doesn't have access to the park. So we know that we can't really do an assessment of that. So even though we know it's that it is the position of the council that we have an appropriate assessment, it doesn't, not in terms of the ruling, because it does not have an assessment of the habitats mitigation. And if an officer can swear that we do have that, our question, members, would have to be, well, where is it? It has to be in front of us, so that we know we've got that assessment and we can take it into account in our decision making. We know without that, the precautionary principle, Wadensey, the law requires that we cannot grant consent, and that's why I asked for deferral on that point, because we do not have that information in front of us. We don't have an assessment of the habitats mitigation. That's absolutely for certain. We haven't seen it. No one has. It doesn't exist anyway, and so we have to defer on those grounds. But other members, I don't expect everyone to fully appreciate that. They simply know we haven't got that information, of course. And the idea, I think, certainly, that we can use the time to try and get ourselves some affordable housing within this by looking at viability properly. I think that's quite an attractive idea to me, to make sure that we get the very, very best. Because Carol's right, it is a lot better than what other attempts that we've seen. And there are people who support with, hey, let's just get on with this. There are many contrary points, but I do, and we have to respect the position of the majority at Waverley Borough Council. That's democracy. So, provided that we're abiding by the law and providing that we're doing our best in terms of policy and provision of for affordable housing, then we have to go with that. I'm satisfied with that. But we do need that assessment of the mitigation, and we do need I think, to take another look at the viability, because it does look very dubious if you've read the documents that are in open. And obviously, I haven't seen the. I would like to see the information that's in exempt. Thank you, Chairman. So I ask people, please, to support deferral so that we can get the information that isn't in front of us, which the law requires we see.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Councillor Follows,
Can I just come back on Councillor Hyman's view? Okay, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'm sorry.
Please, yeah. Councillor Follows, did you wish to speak as seconder?
I'm not going to speak to the first part of Councillor Hyman's motion, but for the second part on the affordable housing, I do really think that members have made it clear that they don't find that acceptable, that there's no affordable housing with this, and have seemingly conceded that we can't discuss it at this time, effectively that we've lost this one and maybe we'll do better on the next one. I would either like to see it deferred to discuss those matters, as Councillor Hyman has suggested, regarding affordable housing, or to subsequently take it to exempt matters to discuss it now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Goodridge, did you wish to speak to this proposal?
I do, Chairman. I wish to speak against the amendment to defer. I think we're in very dangerous territory here. We rely on officers, not only the officers present, but other officers to give us technical reports. We are not experts in the accountancy of affordability of housing, highways, and all these things. And to suggest that we defer it so that we can, as a committee, become experts on whether or not affordable houses can be afforded, we have not accepted the applicant's report at face value. We have got it checked out by our own experts who have come to the same conclusion. Now, who are we to start now saying that we know better? And likewise, we've had legal advice as to the Habitat's business and are being told that everything is in place and it has been looked at. I just don't accept that we as a committee should now start ferreting about, trying to become experts in all the other experts' fields. Matters of judgment, yes. And when it comes to judgment, I agree with Councillor Coburn. But when it comes to technical matters, I think we have to be very, very careful. By all means, at the right time in another application, educate ourselves generally as to the matters that go into affordability of housing and maybe look at the figures. But we have to accept that somebody who is an expert has looked at it and has said it's okay not to have affordable housing in this instant, however disappointing that may be.
Thank you. Councillor James, I've got your name on the list. Did you wish to speak to this proposal or... No? Okay. Councillor Wojciechowski.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. This is all very interesting, but it sticks in my throat like you wouldn't believe when I look at the definition of affordable housing. And in this particular scheme, by size and definition, these are more affordable to the masses. They're also in a location which makes it sustainable to the environment around it. If I look at the desecration of our beautiful green fields in and around Cranley, where we had to get 7 market houses, some of which were valued at 1.2 million, to provide us with affordable housing of £400,000, it just makes a farce of what is being actually proposed here this evening. So what I would say, whilst I have great empathy with affordable housing and its need, and it should be in every scheme, as I said, by the size and definition of these type of properties, they will be affordable to the masses who will live in a sustainable area. And I would like to go back and support what Carol Coburn said here. Matter of judgment in terms of design and everything else, I actually quite like it. But let's move on. We've got a site
we
here.
are
We
talking
can do
to the
something.
deferral at the
so
moment. Yeah.
That's my point.
Thank you.
That I'd like to make. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Storey.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't want to say the same things as have already been said, but firstly, Councillor Hyman, in an email which he copied me in today, says he is not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. Neither are most of us here. And we, like my aunt, who was a Justice of the Peace, she wasn't a lawyer either, but she relied on advice given to her by the Clerk of the Court, and we rely on the advice given to us by our in-house lawyers' teams, backed up by whatever external resource they need to get. Let's take this to the logical end point. If we believe that Councillor Hyman is correct, and we support him and turn down this application or defer it for some unknown period of time, because Councillor Hyman hasn't suggested when he would be satisfied with being able to make a decision. What will happen is that the developer will take this to appeal, and the planning inspector will say, well, what's happened here? Oh yes, we have legal advice from the officers that everything was exactly as it should be. We've got advice from external consultants on the matter of the affordable housing, and what has happened, the council in its wisdom have taken the advice of an unqualified person. That's not reasonable, and this will be allowed at appeal without any compunction. I vote against this deferral, and I think we all should.
Thank you. Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have some sympathy with Councillor Hyman's concerns. A long time ago, when Councillor Roger Steele and I were sitting together in planning and Sangs first reared its ugly head, we kept asking, can someone just prove that it works? Because the idea of Sangs is that if you create this little green space in a particular area, then people will take their dogs there and will leave the nice dark-wood warblers alone in the SPA. And we kept asking the really quite simple question, has anyone counted the number of people walking in there with dogs before Sangs, and counted the number of people walking in there after Sangs, and the number of people walking in with Sangs, and produced some hard numbers that say it works or it doesn't work? Now, if these numbers exist, and I hear some quite strong words from the central table, then I would really be delighted to see them, because so far in a number of years on this planning committee, I've never actually seen them. I've been told we satisfy Natural England, but I'm not overconfident that actually gives me much cause for feeling happy. So I sympathise with what Councillor Hyman is saying, but honestly, what Councillor Coburn said earlier does ring very true with me, that this is an awful thing. The sooner it's knocked down, the better. And Berkeley Homes have done some really very good developments in town. So although I have sympathy with what Councillor Hyman is saying, that I don't think we've actually properly assessed how we're dealing with these habitats, I am going to not be able to support him on this, but I understand where he's coming from, and if someone can provide us with some concrete figures, it might save a lot of angst in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll move to the proposal. I think now it's been proposed that this application be deferred and seconded. All those in favour of the deferral? And those against? Thank you. Okay, oh, sorry. Can you put your hands up again, please?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17.
And abstentions? Just one. Thank you. So that proposal is defeated, Councillor Hyman. So if we can move back to the application in hand. Does anybody have any new points to make on this? Councillor Ward.
Just a question, are my numbers going to be put into the electric charging points, and do I have any support for it, instead of being 2 lots of 20%, for it being 100%?
I did have a note to ask that question myself, Councillor Ward, yes. Did we have any thoughts on that, officers, about increasing the number of charging points?
The 20% figures are based on the Surrey guidance, which is the adopted guidance that we work to. So in officers' view, it wouldn't be reasonable to require them to deliver 100%. In addition, we have asked the question of the developers, because we wanted to ask the question in case they would want to offer that 100% of electric vehicle charging points, and they have said that they wouldn't be able to deliver that because it would increase the size of the power plant within the building significantly, such as it wouldn't be able to fit within the size that they've allocated to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Coburn, you wish to come back?
Yes, very quickly, Chairman. I just wanted to remind officers and yourself about an extra informative or condition about public art. Didn't want it to move to the recommendation without it being included. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we've got that one covered. Thank you. Councillor Hunter.
I think it should be a prerequisite that they make provision for charging points. Whether you do it now or you retrofit it later, it will have to be done. So I think the developer must come to the party and provide that. As he's not providing affordable housing, that's the least they can do.
Thank you. Councillor Nazir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would say the same thing, because the car park is going to be in the basement, and they can't take up, in 50 years, the building is going to be there, and the petrol and diesel cars are going to move away. So how are we going to provide for those cars? Are they going to be parked somewhere else and take up the parking for those electrical points? They should be put in there right now because of the car park being in the basement. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick point. I think the officers said that the applicants have come back and said that they're unable to increase the charging points because the power plant they're putting in isn't big enough and the space they've allocated is big enough. Could the officer confirm that that actually means that if there's a need in 10 years, 15 years' time, they'll be unable to put the charging points in?
Unfortunately, I can't answer that question. I don't know what technology there will be in 10 to 15 years' time and whether the same amount of power would be required. I can only answer the question from today and the current situation. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Mulliner.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a different point. On these charging points, I do note that they're providing slightly more car parking space than the Waverley standard. Is it not possible that some of that space, that extra space, could be sacrificed to provide additional power units so that a greater proportion of the parking spaces could have electrical charging?
Any comment, officers?
I think, unfortunately, what we need to do this evening is assess the scheme in front of us, and members need to determine whether they find the scheme as presented, whether they find that acceptable, or whether they do not find it acceptable. Thank you.
Councillor Hunter, you wish to come back. Is this a new point or the same point?
I would like to propose that they increase put a condition in. Seek a seconder.
Okay. Seconder, Councillor Nazir. All those in favour of adding an extra condition that additional... Okay, officers, would you like to comment on that first?
We've already offered our advice, but should members wish to, I would recommend changing the condition. Should members wish to do that, then that is within their remit to do so. Thank you.
Right, does any member wish to speak to this proposal, or can we go straight to a vote? Okay. Okay, Councillor Hunter, you've proposed it. Would you like to tell them what your proposal is, please?
I propose that they put the maximum amount of charging points or facilitate the maximum amount of charging points for each parking space. Because as long as I'm standing here riding my bike, they're going to be forced to be done in the near future.
So are you asking for 138 charging points? Yes. Okay. Right. Sorry, Councillor Goodridge.
Mr. Chairman, we have to deal with the planning application that's before us. And it's what is being said in this application that we have to determine is they're going to provide the 20% as recommended by the County Council plus the extra 20%, which is what is in the condition. If we start putting in conditions which changes the application, I don't think we can do it.
Officers, do you have an opinion on that?
Sorry, Chairman. Yes, we do. and so just to totally concur with what's been said by a couple of members. First of all, Louise is absolutely right. We have to determine what's in front of us. We cannot, much as we want to, have a crystal ball and look into the future. And who knows, driverless cars, who knows 10, 15, 20 years' time what we might be doing by getting around or not getting around or staying at home. We relied on the advice we've got from the Highway Authority, and again the fallback situation is if it went to appeal, I'm afraid, much unpopular as this sounds, and don't get me wrong, I'm hugely in favour of electronic transport, but the inspector would say, as we said, the first question would be, well, what does the Highway Authority say? And they've recommended a certain figure, Chairman. So this might be unpalatable to people, but I'm afraid that's where we are.
Okay, Councillor James, you wish to speak to this?
Oh, thank you, Chairman. I will be supporting the application as it stands. If in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, long after I'm gone, they need to put in more charging points or an aircraft hangar on the top because everybody's flying in because the traffic's come to a standstill, then they'll put in an application to change it. As it stands, I will be supporting it as it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move to this proposal then. So the proposal is that the condition is changed to provide 138 charging points for electric cars. All those in favour?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
And against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
Abstentions? 2.
2.
Okay. Right, so that proposal is defeated. I think it's time we moved on to the recommendation, which is that subject to the applicant entering into an appropriate legal agreement to secure the provision of contributions towards education, infrastructure, SUDS, management, maintenance, open space management, maintenance, contributions to off-site play pitch improvements and play space refurbishments, leisure contributions towards Heathland Hub and Farnham Leisure Centre, contribution to recycling containers, contributions to Sang at Farnham Park, off-site highways improvements, travel plan, bicycle bus vouchers, funding and procurement of loading bays and creation of car club, and subject to conditions 2 to 4, 6 to 22, 24 to 32 and 36, renumbered where necessary, plus the additional condition regarding public art, and subject to amended conditions 1, 5 and 23, additional condition 39 and informatives. Permission be granted. All those in favour?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18.
And those against?
1.
Abstentions?
1.
Okay. So that recommendation is approved. And then we move on to recommendation B, that if the requirements of recommendation A are not met within 6 months of the date of resolution to grant permission, then permission be refused for reasons 1 to 3 in the update sheet. All those in favour of that recommendation?
That's unanimous.
Jolly good. Thank you very much. So we'll move on to the second item this evening. I'll let the officers change round.
Okay. Do you want to take a quick very cool?
Hmm?
Do you want to take a quick
No, I don't think so. Don't need a comfort break, do you?
No, I don't think so. No. Only done there in 25 minutes.
We're just loading up the report on the screen. Right, this is item 7 on the agenda, which is application reference WA/2018/0329, Little Acres Nursery, St George's Road, Badshot Lee, GU9 9NT, for the erection of 94 dwellings, including associated parking, landscaping, open space and infrastructure, following the demolition of existing buildings. And I would ask Kaylee to present the application.
Thank you, Chairman. The application site can be seen outlined in red on the screen. This site is located to the west of St George's Road and to the east of Badshot Lee Road. The site forms part of a larger allocated site under the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan, policy FNP 14C, which also includes land to the east. The allocation is shown in the top right corner of the screen. The aerial image on the screen shows the immediate surrounding area in relation to the application site. Badshot Lee can be seen to the northwest. Squires Garden Centre can be seen to the southwest, with Badshot Farm Nurseries and Badshot Farm to the south. The land to the immediate east of the application site forms part of a residential property, Waverley's Folly, shown here. A public footpath runs along the northern boundary of the site, just along here. The land to the northeast is currently under development following the grant of planning permission for 69 dwellings, just here. To the direct north is Badshot Lee Recreation Ground. This slide shows the existing access to the site. Photograph A, you can see the development taking place on the adjacent northeastern site. Photograph B shows St George's Road. The access to the site can be seen just here, and the access to Waverley Follies just here. In photograph C, you can see the view down towards St George's Road from the application site. This slide shows the photos taken from the eastern part of the site, which comprises a former plant nursery. There are a number of dilapidated greenhouses, polytunnels and outbuildings, which are shown in photograph A. There is also a small cafe and residential dwelling known as Little Acres, shown in photographs B and C respectively. This slide shows photographs taken from the western part of the site, which comprises open fields with buildings in poor state of repair. Photograph A shows views across the site towards properties along Beech Tree Drive to the north. Photograph B shows the view of the southwestern far corner of the site, and photograph C shows the public footpath running along the northern boundary of the site. The photographs on this slide are taken from outside the application site. Photograph A is taken from the recreation ground, looking south towards the application site. The existing glass houses associated with the plant nursery can be seen in the background. Photograph B shows an existing link from the public footpath to the recreation ground. And photograph C shows a view looking north along Badshot Lee Road. Full permission is sought for the erection of 94 dwellings following the demolition of the existing buildings on the site. Access to the site would be provided from St George's Road to the east. There would be 3 blocks of maisonettes to the northwest of the site comprising 1-bedroom units, shown here, here and here. There will be a mixture of detached, semi-detached and terraced dwellings across the remainder of the site. There would also be garages, carports, cycle and bin stores. The proposal seeks an area of public open space to the north of the site, arranged in a crescent feature. Just here. The public footpath to the north would be widened and enhanced, and a bicycle link to the northwest. There would also be open space to the northeast of the site, and a 5 metre wide landscape buffer to the south. Outline planning permission has previously been granted under application WA 251935 for the erection of up to 80 dwellings, including affordable, and a building to provide commercial and retail use. This planning permission has not yet been implemented and is extant. The difference between the current proposal and of that application are that the application site now includes the vertical strip of land in the centre, which was previously excluded. The current proposal seeks full permission for the erection of 94 dwellings on the site, an increase in 14 dwellings above that granted in the outline permission. There would be the provision of 30% affordable housing on the site, opposed to 40% that was previously approved. However, this would meet the requirements of policy AHN1 of the Local Plan Part 1. This slide shows the location of the proposed affordable housing, which is shown in yellow. The following slides show the proposed street scene elevations. This slide shows the entrance of the site as marked in red on the below plan. And this slide shows a perspective from this corner of the site, also showing the far eastern proposed public space. This slide shows the opposite end of the site, showing the frontage to Badshot-Lee Road. And this slide shows the view from within the centre of the site, looking towards the south. This slide shows the semi-detached dwellings opposite the public open space to the north of the site, arranged in a crescent feature. All dwellings would be 2 stories in height. There would be 10 different house types and 3 different masonette designs, with further variation in the detailing and materials finishes. This slide shows Block 3, which appears as a row of terrace buildings. This slide shows an example of the proposed 2-bedroom dwellings. And this slide shows an example of the proposed 3-bedroom dwellings. And finally, this slide shows an example of the proposed 4-bedroom dwellings. This slide shows the proposed external finishes. However, a condition has been recommended requiring the submission of materials for agreement prior to the commencement of development. There will be 2 main brick types, red and brown. Indicative samples have been provided. There will be tile hanging and render on various properties throughout the site. There would also be a mixture of brown tile and grey slate style roofs. The matters of principle and technical opinion are loss of agricultural land, housing land supply, affordable housing, highways and parking, the impact on the public right-of-way, refuse and recycling storage, air quality, land contamination, archaeology, impact on trees, flooding and drainage, infrastructure contributions, the effect on the SPA and biodiversity. The matters of judgment for members' consideration tonight are the location of the development. The development would be within the built-up area boundary of Farnham as defined in the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan and would be in close proximity to existing facilities within Badshot-Lee. Housing mix. Officers consider the housing mix to be broadly in line with the evidence contained within the SHMA. Impact on visual amenity. Officers consider that the development would have an appropriate scale, layout and appearance. Impact on residential amenity. Officers consider that there would not be material harm to residential amenity subject to the recommended conditions. Standard of accommodation and amenity and play space. Officers are satisfied that the scheme would provide a satisfactory level of accommodation, amenity and play space. I would like to draw the members' attention to the updates sheet. Consideration has been given to the revised MPPF published yesterday. There have been 4 additional letters of objection relating to access, visual amenity, parking provision and land ownership, and the Council's response to those has been provided. An additional condition has been recommended to secure details of the access to the remainder of the allocated site. There has also been a condition recommended to ensure that the garaging is used for vehicles and domestic storage only. Moving to the recommendation, this would be the revised recommendations A and B as set out on pages 5 to 6 of the update sheet. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Kaylee. We have public speaking on this application, and first of all I would invite the objector, John Bradburn, to speak to us, please. Good evening, Mr. Bradburn. You have 4 minutes from when you start speaking.
Chair, members, thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. I act for the applicant of the land to the east, and reluctantly we are appearing to speak against the proposed development, but do so for good reason. To confirm, we are not opposed to the principle of this development or the way in which the design of the scheme is coming forward. Our concern lies with the proposed access and how this can best serve the allocation as a whole. At present, the information before you does not present a clear solution for how the remainder of the allocation can be brought forward via a single point of access. The officer's update makes reference to an indicative figure within the submitted transport statement as being an appropriate solution and seeks the detail through a condition. However, the transport statement is not an approved document, and the plans which you are being asked to approve makes no reference or allowance for this future access point. This creates a contradiction between a condition and an approved plan, changing the scheme before you. There is therefore the potential for ambiguities should any enforcement issues arise in future. The proposed condition requires approval of access details for, and I quote, the remainder of the allocated site. We note that this remainder of the allocation lies both with our client and the County Council. This condition therefore appears to require a scheme to be approved across land which is not in the applicant's control or indeed within the application boundary. This cannot be undertaken via a condition and therefore fails the test of revised MPPF paragraph 55. Furthermore, the condition does not require the delivery of an access solution to the boundary of our client's site, resulting in the need for a secondary access in any event, as it will not serve the allocation. However, if the application tonight is deferred and considered in conjunction with our client's live application, these issues could be resolved. Our client's application, which is a material consideration that has not been fully acknowledged by officers beyond the planning context, seeks approval for the full detail of how the allocation can be served as a whole. At the very least, this solution should be acknowledged on the applicant's material to demonstrate that they are not prejudicing the delivery of our client's scheme or the allocation. We recognise the design concerns from officers and the Badshot-Lee Community Association regarding the potential for multiple accesses to the allocation if both applications are approved. We feel that a well-resolved and coordinated access solution would deliver a development that fulfils the requirement of FNP 14C and have the added benefit of avoiding damage to TPO trees on the northern boundary of the Little Acres access, which officers currently deem to be acceptable. However, a solution that achieves this is not being put forward to you for approval this evening. These are all matters which need to be discussed and agreed so that a solution can come forward that benefits all parties. We have sought to meet with officers to raise these issues, but despite requests and offering to enter into a planning performance agreement, we have not been able to do so, leaving no option other than for us to speak against the scheme tonight. We are not asking for the merits of our client's application to be considered today, but ask members to defer the application before you and to request that officers meaningfully engage with us to discuss the available options. This would be to the benefit of the coordinated development of this important allocation and would allow members to make an informed decision on both applications, a not unreasonable request. Thank you for allowing us this time to speak, and I hope that you can endorse our request for further engagement and consideration of the issues at hand before a decision is made on either application.
Thank you, Mr. Bradburn. Now, call on the supporter, James McConnell, please. Good evening, Mr. McConnell. You also have 4 minutes from when you start speaking.
Good evening, members. I want to begin by addressing the issues that have been raised by the previous speaker with regards to accessing the wider neighbourhood plan allocation. And I'll simply refer you to the officer's addendum report, which I think deals with this matter quite succinctly, and it states, the Little Acres site benefits from an extant outline planning permission for 80 houses with access provided from St George's Road. This fallback position is a material planning consideration. The County Highway Authority has raised no objection to the current application subject to conditions. It would therefore be unreasonable to refuse the current application with regards to the proposed access. Officers are satisfied that the proposal would not prejudice the development of the entire allocated site. This has been demonstrated in the submitted transport statement and shown in Figure 5 in that report. In light of the comments received, an additional condition has been recommended to secure details of the access to the remainder of the site. Bellway have discussed this condition with your officers to ensure that this will enable the provision of an access from the application site into the adjacent land, thereby facilitating the delivery of the wider neighbourhood plan allocation. That deals with that issue. I'd want to now move on to the actual details of the scheme that's been presented to you this evening. The officers clarified why we have submitted a full application rather than a reserved matters application because of this additional land that we've required, and that in itself has allowed for a more comprehensive redevelopment of the site, and it's enabled Beltway to produce a layout that reads well as a whole rather than being split into two distinct halves, and also to remove the retail element from the development, which we didn't feel was appropriate for this location. In terms of the design of the scheme itself, following a presentation to members earlier this year, we've reviewed the scheme and introduced a significant number of changes in order to address the design-related issues that were raised by members. These changes include a reduction in the number of homes from 96 to 94, redesigning and resiting those dwellings framing the recreation ground in order to create a more distinctive crescent, the introduction of additional materials, including use of render and varied roof materials, more variation to the form and design of windows, an increased use of design details, including additional chimneys, brick coining and splayed arch window headers. Overall, we feel these changes provide significantly more visual interest and variety to the streetscape and to the individual dwellings themselves to reflect the character of Badshot Lee. We've also responded to consultation comments and provided additional feature trees, more rich species-rich landscaping to support enhanced ecological measures. The development provides 30% affordable housing in line with policy and a mix of units that reflects the Council's overall housing needs. We provided for the effective integration of this development with the wider village, and this is supported by the upgrading of the public footpath that crosses the site. Heads of terms for the Section 106 have been agreed, delivering almost £1 million towards local infrastructure provision. To conclude, it's clear that the delivery of this site would represent a significant contribution to the housing supply within Waverley. It's important to recognise that this site is now owned outright by Bellway, so that I can offer you the certainty that if members resolve to grant permission this evening, then the development will be constructed without delay once planning permission has been issued. We indeed hope that you're able to support the officer's recommendation this evening.
Thank you, Mr McConnell.
Thank you.
Over to you, members. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. First off, thank you to the officers for replying to my original questions by email. That was very helpful. Thank you. Especially it relates to, I think, the new condition that was issued. Can I just a couple of minor questions? Why did you choose not to engage with the principal objector on this matter? It does feel like they did have some valid points, as there was a need for a condition. Secondly, why is it, and I'm going to be a bit of a broken record here, why have we agreed to less affordable housing than the original planning application? It seems that everything from our side in terms of judgment is immutable when we look at a previous planning application, but affordable housing always seems to go by the by when we look at a new application coming in. I would particularly point out that there are more houses, there's more houses in this, so I assume more profit and more margin for the developer. In fact, and it's a reduction of particularly two-bedroom dwellings from the affordable level. Where have these gone and what's the justification? It's not in the report. Thank you.
Louise.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, in relation to your first point regarding the occupier of the adjacent land to the east of the proposal, we did advise at pre-application stage that the developers should engage with each other, but ultimately we have to assess the application which is in front of us. And in this particular instance, we have an extant permission on the site. The access is, as you can see from the top drawing on your screen, the access is exactly the same as is proposed in this application, and that is a material consideration. If you don't grant this evening on that basis, they could go ahead and build the outline scheme with that access, and furthermore, should they choose to appeal this decision, then it's highly likely that that would be allowed at appeal because of that fallback position. However, the site is a full allocation within the final neighbourhood plan, and it is important to ensure that the remainder of the site isn't prejudiced because that is a new policy. Yeah. And so we did seek from the applicants additional information to ensure that it wouldn't prejudice the adjoining scheme. So as you can see here, this is the access that is the same as the outline scheme, so it would come off St George's Road here, and you could enter the other part of the site through a new access here. And if I can just show you an indicative plan, which has been submitted not as part of their application documents because this is outside of the red line, but as part of their design and access statement, because we wanted to be convinced that the remainder of the site wouldn't be prejudiced, because it is a full site allocation, as you know, and we want to see the entire site developed. So we are satisfied from the indicative information that has been achieved that this wouldn't prejudice the remainder of the site. And to clarify, the condition that has been attached, it would require them to submit full details. So should an application on that site be approved in the meantime that sort of joined the application site at a different point prior to the discharge of that condition, then we could seek to make sure that that access joins up. In addition, this is an indicative plan, so it does show the access going into the adjoining site. What the condition would require is effectively the applicants to agree the access and then to build that access up to their red line boundary. Beyond the red line in the adjacent site would then become the responsibility of the adjoining landowners. Thank you, Chairman.
Did you want to address the affordable housing?
Apologies,
Yep.
I forgot about that point. With regards to the affordable housing, when the original application came in, we did not have an up-to-date local plan. We didn't have a policy with regards to affordable housing at all within countryside locations as this was at that point. Since that time, we have adopted the local plan. The policy is for 30% affordable housing to be provided. This has been provided and is fully compliant with that policy. And on that basis, as that is what our policy says, it would be unreasonable to refuse. Thank you.
Yes, you may come back.
If an application had come in with 20% affordable housing, they would probably argue that the current version of local plan says 30, but because it was already approved under 20, they would be able to keep it as 20. So why does it not work the reverse?
Elizabeth.
Actually,
had they got a permission for 20%, which I think it's highly unlikely they would have done, because I don't think the council or even an inspector on appeal pre the local plan would have regarded that as a sufficient benefit to outweigh the harm to the countryside. But let's presuppose they had got a permission for 20%. If they were coming back to change it now, yes, that would be material consideration that they had an extant permission, but I think we would also request that you apply significant weight to an up-to-date local plan position to say, if you're going to change this scheme, you should demonstrate why you cannot now comply with your up-to-date local plan and provide 30. So it doesn't quite work the other way around. And in fact, I think we'd be on very strong grounds to be saying that the situation's changed. We now have an up-to-date local plan. You might have an extant permission, but we would be urging you now to comply with the adopted policy.
Thank you. Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this application is a vast improvement upon the one that the outline that we've already granted, and of course the fact that they now own all the land does enable us to provide a far better layout than could have been provided before. And I'm impressed by the amount of communication and consultation that's been going on with not only the local people but also this council. On a small point on the which I think is a relevant point on the affordable housing, of course before it was 40% of 80, which if you take basic arithmetic must have been 32 houses. Plus, of course, there was commercial and retail there. I reckon 30% of 94 is just about the same, a number of affordable houses. So the amount of affordable houses on this site has not changed. It's the percentages that has changed. And it seems to me that is very relevant as to how much this site can afford to provide.
Thank you. Councillor Story.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for Councillor Goodrich's maths, I actually worked it out. It's a difference of 3 houses, or 3.5. I wanted to make some comments on the new design, which I agree is considerably better than the old one, and I'm glad to see we got rid of the commercial space, which really wasn't needed. Can I see the slide with the affordable housing in it, please? That worries me. We have always striven to avoid ghettoisation of the affordable housing, and it seems to me that that is the complete antithesis of that as an idea. I'm not happy with that at all. I welcome the fact that we've got the affordable housing. I understand that a lot of it is the 1 bedroom and therefore it's in the blocks. If it could have been spread out more evenly, then that would have been much better. We do like these things to be tenancy neutral and avoid the ghettos. I very much appreciate the improvements to the public right-of-way across the top. Having struggled through that overgrown, brambled path myself several times, it would be nice to have that east-west path in a fit state. That's, I think, everything I've got to say.
Thank you. Richard, do you wish to comment?
Just a couple of points, and it is quite funny because we were saying about going the bramble strewn path, because we were fighting our way through the blackberries when we were out on site to look at this. But seriously, on the points you've raised about the tenure neutral point, we've certainly, in terms of design, this scheme is tenure neutral. So though whilst one in principle might be concerned about there not being a pepper-potted approach to the affordable housing element on this scheme, when one is actually on the site, when it's constructed, it will be tenure neutral. And unfortunately, again, this is something we were talking with housing colleagues about earlier on today. We are sometimes, and though we resist and push back, we're not only up against the practicalities of the development industry, but we're also up against the eventual registered providers who obviously say it's much more convenient in terms of maintenance and everything else. So we're in a bit of a no-win situation. But in terms of how this will look on the ground, and I totally appreciate your concern about ghettoisation. I think visually, and I'm looking at Kaylee to support me on this. One on the ground won't be able to tell the difference. But sorry, over to you, Kaylee, if you want to add anything on that. Or Louise, sorry.
That's fine.
Sorry, Chairman, just wanted to come in on that specific point.
Yeah, just to reiterate, yeah, we consider as officers that there was a high quality design across both the affordable housing and the market housing. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Mulliner.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm afraid I didn't understand. If we could go back to the same slide that Councillor Storey referred to, I have exactly the same concerns. I'm sorry to say, although I appreciate all the positive comments made about this, I am unable to support the recommendation to approve for this reason. I think that is a very clear case of ghettoisation. It's nothing to do with how they look, it's where people live. And the whole point of ghettoisation is not to worry about the visual aspects, but not to encourage unwelcome social trends. I will not support a scheme which so clearly puts the poorer people, if you like, in one corner. It is totally against my principles, and I'm afraid I will say this at every planning meeting where we get this sort of thing. We must work harder with the developers to spread these out more. And I think it's a very important point, and I entirely endorse what Councillor Storey said.
Thank you. Councillor James.
Thank you, Chairman. When I was on the Housing Committee, it was the housing associations and not the developers who like all their housing together. Otherwise, it is not financially viable for them to look after them if they are pepper potted all the way, if you say number 1, 5, 7, 8 is social housing and the rest of them. That is what they require. I don't believe these are going to be built by Waverley as council houses, therefore we have to agree with the providers of the social housing. But I've got 2 points. I mean, I will be supporting the application. My first one is the permitted development rights. On page 72, condition 5, it says that, you know, that people can't put in windows, doors and everything else, but only because of overlooking. It doesn't say that they can't put in Velux windows up in the roof. And if you go back to the, it's got a street scene elevation slide, every one of these roofs, as far as I'm aware on this site, is exactly the same height. They have all got high-pitched roofs. Every one of those houses could have some rooms upstairs. Out of the 94, those ones that say they can't because of elevations, not because of, that's because of overlooking, not for any other reason. So that's 29 roofs, it leaves 65. If you take away the 28 affordable housing, it leaves 37 roofs that could have an extra 1 or 2 bedrooms. Therefore, it doesn't meet our car parking requirements. And I have an absolute thing. We used to have a condition that stopped that happening on new build. We removed permitted development rights for those reasons. And it seems to have sort of now got lost. But all last year and the year before, we were doing it. So I would like that one removed because condition 5 doesn't cover that. I've also got one which is very interesting. In the previous application, there were contributions to waste recycling, the blue bins. In this one, I can't remember what on page it is. Oh, page 26. It says that the blue bins for dry recycling and food waste containers are supplied at the expense of Waverley Borough Council. Well, if the previous applicants had to pay for recycling bins, why on this application are Waverley doing it? It isn't a condition, it doesn't say so, but I literally have only just spotted it after the previous application, so perhaps one could just look in that, but I will be supporting the application, officers.
Thank you. Councillor Denis.
Thank you, Chair. Since I put my hand up, the point I was going to raise has been mentioned a couple of times, but it is about the affordable housing and being in blocks. The argument about one, it's tenure neutral, that won't make any difference at all because people will know that's the affordable housing. The argument that it is easier to maintain, it's a small site, so one house being 50 yards or 100 yards from the other is not a financial or an operational difficulty to maintain that premises. So I totally disagree with those arguments. I really, like Councillor Mulliner, I dislike seeing them in blocks. We have in the past had that changed when we have not supported. From my own experience, I had that changed, and it makes the site so much more village friendly. So that was the point I wanted to make, but just one final plea actually to probably Elizabeth and the team. When we have these great big long reports and you get a comment from a statutory respondee and it says this should be subject to a condition, you then have to go all the way to the conditions at that point to see whether it is in the conditions and then go back to where you were. It'd be really useful if they just put in brackets, condition, so applies. It would make our job a damn sight easier, making sure what's been said is covered by conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Follows, you wish to come back?
Yes, just a very small couple of points. First off, I agree entirely with Councillor Mulliner. We had a session with the developers on this particular application. We went through a lot of things. It's one of those really good sessions where we can sort of speak off the record and deal with a lot of the matters, which I think is a really good way of doing things. Generally, we all had this issue about this ghettoisation of the affordable housing. Absolutely every single one of us, regardless of party, we all said the same thing. So I'm equally disappointed to see it here. Just for members' information as well, the definitive numbers in the affordable housing side of it are on page 36 and 37 and is a reduction of 4 properties on the 2-bedroom houses. Can I just ask, just for my own information going forward, do you round up or round down on 30%? Because it's just ever so slightly under, isn't it?
I mean, it will depend on the total percentage and the total number of dwellings on the site. Thank you.
Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'm always worried when I see vast amounts of windows being obscure glazed because it generally does indicate that things are being rather squashed in, and I also wonder how well this gets policed in 5 or 6 years' time when we have to go around and knock on someone's door and say, I'm sorry, Granny, you should actually have double proper glazing in that window. So I'm always a little concerned. 30-odd houses with restrictions on glazing of their windows just strike me as a little excessive. However, I don't share the earlier councillor's concern about avoiding people expanding into their attics and removing development rights. The Housing ONS has just done a huge study on future housing, and this was one of the very things that we actually supported, is allowing people to expand into their attics because you get many more people in the same square footage on the ground, and it's actually a very efficient way of housing people. I'll come back to my favourite thing because I'd hate to disappoint anybody, electric charging vehicles and points. If we have a figure of 20% plus 20% given to us by SARI, why do we insist on this convoluted gobbledygook in condition 15? Why don't we just write down it's going to be 20% plus 20% and put the numbers in there? However, that said, seeing as we are now not in an enclosed space with a basement and a power plant that won't cope, I would still, in this case where it can be done, and it's not a change of condition because the condition doesn't have any numbers in, so I would like to see it inserted in condition 15, 100% of the housing shall have electric charging points, and I would like to make that a formal proposal. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Any comments, officers?
I mean, the comments remain as they were on Wallmead with regards to the electric vehicle charging points. It is based on Surrey Council's guidance, which is the 20%. Thank you, Chairman.
Does anybody wish to second Councillor Ward's proposal that we... Councillor Hunter. Right, does anybody wish to speak to that proposal that we increase the number of charging points? Yes, Councillor Mullen.
Thank you, Chairman. It occurred to me actually on the previous application as well that the condition actually makes no reference to numbers. And I'm just, and I'm sure Surrey are not saying that 20% is a maximum. So I'm not quite sure why it should be without our gift to impose a higher number if we think it right. Could the officers please comment?
Louise?
Yeah, the same comment as applies before. If you feel that that's necessary for the scheme to be acceptable, then you should apply that. But yeah, would remind you that conditions do need to be necessary in order for you to apply them and reasonable. So you would need to take that into consideration when applying your condition.
Councillor Ward, do you wish to speak to your proposal, yes?
Yes, indeed, I do. I'm sure Surrey is a wonderful institution, and I have constantly in this chamber echoed my wonder at how Surrey highways come to decisions. But I don't feel that we are hidebound by this 20% that they have. I have three reasons for it. One, I totally disagree with it. Two, the government is banning the sale of petrol and diesel vehicles in the future time in which these houses are going to be there. And therefore, whether I'm dead and buried or not, I don't think we should be in a position of having these things retrofitted later. And is it reasonable? Well, we as a council, as I said earlier, are building social housing, and we are putting them into every single one of our social housing. I think if Waverley as a house builder can take the lead on this, Waverley as a planning committee should follow Waverley as a house builder's lead and insist upon it. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak to this amendment? Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, just there's a difference between getting developers to put the charging units in place and enabling it with putting the cabling in, putting the ducting in, and having it easy and cheap to do in future. I don't know what the situation is at the moment. I know there are so many problems with this being developed. We haven't decided which connectors we're going to use. The old 3 kilowatt chargers, we're now up to many times more than that, and the technology is moving on to such an extent that actually it's difficult to know exactly where we're headed with it and what we are going to need. So although it's great to have all the forward thinking in this respect, we do want to be a little bit careful to make sure that we're not overburdening the developers at the moment, and what we're doing is allowing us to move to provide what we need in future. But I think there's nothing wrong certainly with ensuring that ducting is available. We are told, I think, that by the National Grid that they would need to renew 30% of the national system if we were going to be putting in place fast charges for everybody, and that's not going to happen. So they want us to have service stations where we all stop. So there are still things to work out in this, but in principle I support where Councillor Ward is headed, but I think it might be more sensible to just ensure that ducting is in place. I don't know what others think about that. Thank you, Chairman.
Are you proposing an amendment to the amendment?
Oh, I don't really want to do that, Chairman.
If so, we have to address the first
do other
amendment
people
first.
think that might be sensible, or would that just be more time? I don't know.
Let's discuss that in a minute. Councillor Nazir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just what Councillor Kevin Denis and Chris Torrey have said. Just support that and put my word into it as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chairman. Coming back on this charging point, I'm just musing over this 20%. I can see its relevance where you've got shared car parking facilities and you can put 20% of the spaces and people can do it. But I'm just wondering how they're going to allocate the 20% or whatever to this estate. Because if you put them in the wrong houses, you're going to have people who want them and people who've got them and not matching up. And it seems to me that actually we should be asking people to put the charging in. These houses are going to last for a hell of a lot longer than the time when the government's going to move over to force people into electric cars. It seems short-sighted, it's relatively inexpensive. It also basically gives it gives a challenge to the power suppliers to put in adequate supplies into these new estates. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Councillor Byam, and then...
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'm agreeing with the point that Councillor Gray's putting forward as well there. How are they going to allocate this? Are they going to leave the electricity, the charging point, not there until they sell the house and say this is an added extra, you can have this? Or is there going to be facilities to add charging points to every house as they go through, and therefore the ducting that is suggesting about from Councillor Hyman, I'm supportive of. One of the things we talked about some time ago was that we were going to have some form of presentation on electric charging points, etc., and how they do things, because I don't understand what is necessary and what variations there are, if any, and therefore I'm not really understanding what I'm voting for.
You and me both, Maurice. Councillor Ward, would you like to define your proposal and as to whether it is one of 3 different plugs or whether it's just a supply, and then we'll see if Councillor Hunter is still seconding that proposal.
Certainly. Switching a plug is actually quite easy. You could probably do it yourself, even if you're not actually authorised. So I don't really want to get tied up on whether it's a 5-pin Izzy What's-It or a 7-pin whatever. What I want is a power supply capable of charging an electric vehicle to every house on the estate. And if they have 2 parking spaces, I think it's perfectly reasonable to put it into 1, and the house can sort out which car gets charged and whatever. I don't have a problem with that, but I would like every house to have the ability to charge an electric car.
Councillor Hunter, as seconder, are you happy with that proposal?
I am.
Right.
You know, walking around my ward delivering, the amount of cables that I trip over where people are trying to charge their motor vehicles now, it's ludicrous not to provide it. You know, when I bought my house, there was only 1 plug in the lounge. I've just had to rewire it because I need more, because you need more electrical equipment. So, you know, when it was built, it was good, and now it's not good. And we've got to look to the future.
Thank you. Councillor Nazir, briefly, and then we'll go to the recommender.
I support it totally, otherwise we'll have load of extension wires in 94 houses.
Right, so that proposal to amend the condition referring to electric charging points is before you. All those in favour?
Can I just be clear? So
Yes.
it's 100%.
It's 100% supply.
Do officers want to comment on that first? Sorry to...
Okay.
I think we've commented, Chairman. In the end, if members want to amend that condition in that way, it is open to you to
Okay,
do
so
that.
all those in favour of that amendment?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14.
Against? 2.
1, 2.
And abstentions? 1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3.
Okay. Right, so that amendment is carried. Does anybody wish to speak further on the... Councillor Mulliner.
Yes, if I could just come back.
I've got 2 lists of names here and I'm getting a bit muddled. But Councillor Mulliner.
I just wanted to slightly amplify my comments about affordable housing because I could understand Councillor James' concerns. I'm not talking about pepper potting. I think you could move 2 of those blocks to another part of the layout and achieve social gain without making the maintenance of them unreasonably expensive. I think we need to be tougher with the providers. I think they are not giving enough weight to this aspect, and we as the responsible planning authority should be fighting that particular corner. As I say, I'm afraid I'm not prepared to support this on that particular point, given the way it's laid out now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Coburn.
Yes, I'm like everybody else. I certainly want it tenure blind. I mean, I have no idea which of my friends, my children's friends, are owner-occupiers or renters, and I don't particularly want to know. It never comes up in conversation. So as long as the houses are tenure blind, I really can't get terribly worked up about it. I'm really thrilled or much more impressed with the materials across this site. I thought the first application was dull, to say the least. I think, you know, there is variety there, and I think, you know, what is on that site is actually such a marked improvement. I'm so pleased that awful community building has gone. I mean, that was just going to be an eyesore from almost day one, wasn't it? I think what my main point about this is that we still want consultation with the community. It shouldn't end now. As these are being delivered, we want to see the landscaping, especially to the south of the site, so that we don't have this harsh edge to the village. There isn't one there now, we don't want one. So we want consultation, collaboration with all the local people to ensure that this sits well in its plot. There's village signs. We've got one in the Bourne, those of you lucky enough to drive by, with a picture that we created ourselves. You know, talk to the community and see what they want. It's their community, it's their village. I think this is a great improvement. I think there are tweaks, and I certainly think it will need copious amounts of landscaping. But given that, I think it is acceptable. Thank you.
Councillor Hyman, did you still wish to speak? Yes?
Thank you, Chairman, if I may. Yes, I've got a couple of bits and pieces which I've picked up. There is from a letter from Farnham Society we received, and point number 23 on it states, the carriageway width at 5 metres appears narrow when an opportunity exists to incorporate wider access roads. Is it the case that that main access is only 5 metres wide, so you wouldn't get a bin lorry and a car past each other, and that's... Is that the case? If I can have an answer to that first of all, because the rest of what I'm going to say, which is in response to what Mr. Bradburn, I think it is John Bradburn has said, I want to drill into that a little bit. Can we just find out?
Officers, could you answer the question about the carriageway? 2 minutes. Oh, I can use a scale rule a lot quicker than that.
Okay, Chairman, rather than let them do that,
Yes,
we'll ask
please
if we
continue.
may.
We can come back to that one.
Yes, Mr. Bradburn spoke at the beginning in respect of Waverley Folly. It's a lovely name for a building. Can we please have some more clarification, or I want some sort of assurance that I would be right in not pursuing the deferral that he's asking for. I'm not afraid of asking for a deferral, obviously, but I know it doesn't work, but nevertheless, I'm good at bashing my head against brick walls, and but I'm just thinking that here, you know, if the common sense thing to do is to sort out this access so that it suits both parties, and if they're relatively happy with that, I know this, you know, the applicant here wants to run away with the consent tonight. But nevertheless, you know, I still haven't had an answer, and I probably never ever will. But the habitats issue applies to the supposedly extant consent and the principle of development as much as it does now. So, you know, if I were to get an answer to the question, do we have the required assessment of the habitats mitigation, and if that, because I know the answer isn't yes, then we would know that actually, you know, we do have a lot more leeway in changing schemes and getting things right than perhaps most members understand, and it gives us a lot more power to get these things right, not necessarily to stop the developments, because we still want development and we can still justify it, hopefully, if we get the evidence out of Natural England. But I would like to know really about whether Mr. Bradburn has substance there, because it's something that other members haven't actually really approached, and I'm surprised because we were all written to about it, and it was very polite what we were sent. Can we have some reasoning here as to why we should not defer and get that sorted? Because it makes sense to me, and certainly we could also sort out the pepper potting, which I would love to have done.
Would you like to respond to that? Yes?
Yes.
I know you already have, but...
Yeah. In officers' view, it would be unreasonable to either defer the application or refuse the application on the basis of the site next door. This application is in, it's before you this evening, it's in a suitable position to be recommended for approval. In addition, officers have sought confirmation and are satisfied that it does not prejudice the site next door. If it did prejudice the site next door, we would not be presenting this item in front of you this evening. That is a requirement of policy FMP 14 of the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan. So our advice is that it would be unreasonable on that basis. In relation to the query on the width of the access road, the width of the access road is 6 metres. It narrows to 3.5, as you can see, apologies, here, where there is a give-way line there for vehicles coming into the site. So when you're exiting the site, you would need to give way to vehicles exiting. Thank you, Chairman.
No, I didn't. I have a question, actually. I don't think I did indicate, but I'm not clear exactly where the adjacent site is. Is it east, west, south? There, it is east. Okay, thank you. I thought it was, but I didn't know.
Thank you. Councillor Follows, you wish to come? I hope it's something new, is it? Yeah. Sure.
I'll take Councillor Hyman's place and be the person to throw my head potentially against the wall. I would like to motion to defer it so that they can consider the distribution of the affordable housing and also take into consideration Councillor Ward's already on the books new motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a second to Councillor Hyman? Right, would you like to speak to that then, Councillor Follows?
I think it's been made very clear by councillors here, and particularly in the meeting that we had a few months ago when we talked about this site, how we felt about the distribution of the affordable housing. I do have a particular objection about the reduction, but I'm not going to put that as part of the deferral. I would hope perhaps if it is deferred that they would use the time to chat as well regarding the access roads, some of the issues between the parties that the officers have tried to clear up, and I think have done a good job of clearing up. It might be a good opportunity for them just to talk about that as well in the time, but particular motion to defer is based upon the distribution of the affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else wish to speak to that? Councillor Hyman.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I do agree with what other members have said about the improvements to this scheme, and I think, you know, we're not an awful long way away from having something which is really good that residents, you know, all support and everybody can support. And I think that, you know, if we can sort that out, I would be very, very pleased to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak to that motion for deferral? Okay, Councillor Mullen.
I find myself in the interesting position of, yes, agreeing with the last comment. I think deferral would be a less punitive thing than actually refusing. But it wouldn't stop me voting against, I'm afraid, if it goes on to be decided. I think I was interested in Councillor Follow's comment about the meetings having been held beforehand, and I'm sorry that the message from that, if it was as clear as it appears to have been, was not taken on board. So I think for our own sakes, and just to make it clear to developers, applicants, that if we do give them a clear message, they should really react to it, and if they don't, there may be consequences. So I will support this particular motion to defer because it's based upon the affordable housing distribution.
Thank you. Officers, would you like to speak before I put that to the vote? Richard.
Yeah, sorry, Chairman. The only thing to point out, of course, is that one, we will obviously, if that's the view of the committee, we'll go back to the developers and raise all those points with them. Clearly, there's a relationship between the developers and the eventual providers of the affordable homes. So it will have to be a tripartite discussion if I'm making that clear. So whilst we will fully endorse the wishes of committee, if that is committee's wish, it is not just a simple question of just saying, right, developers, put units here and there. We have to look at the longer term. That's the only caveat I would put there, Chairman.
Thank you, members. So the proposal is before you to defer the application. All those in favour of that proposal?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Against?
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
And abstentions? 1. Okay. So that amendment is defeated. So does anybody wish to speak further on the application before us? So if we can move then to the recommendation. Yeah, okay. So this recommendation A, that subject to a Section 106 agreement to secure contributions towards education, recycling provision, playing pitch improvements, off-site environmental improvements, mitigation for the impact on the SPA, off-site highways improvements and SUDs and open space management, maintenance and conditions 1 to 6 inclusive, 8 to 19 inclusive and 22 to 25 inclusive as set out on the agenda report, and amended conditions number 7 and 20, and the amended condition regarding the provision of charging facility to 100% of the properties, and amended reasons for conditions 17, 18, 19, 20, 22, 23, 24, and additional conditions 26 and 27 above. Permission be granted. All those in favour?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
Against? 2.
Okay, 1, 2.
Abstentions? 2.
1, 2, 3.
That recommendation is sorry?
2 seconds. Carol?
Yes, Councillor
Sorry,
Coburn.
Chairman, I was indicating, but you were sort of into your flow. Could we just have an informative, just asking for further community involvement? We have done this before, continuing discussions.
Yes, I don't
with the
think we need
community.
to vote on that. I think that should be a standard thing, shouldn't it, really? Yes. And then moving on to recommendation B, that in the event that the requirements of recommendation A are not met within 6 months of the date of the resolution to grant permission, then permission be refused for the reasons stated in your update sheet. All those in favour?
Okay. Yeah, that's unanimous.
That's unanimous. Thank you very much, members, and safe journey home.
2.5 hours.